Nvidia might be done with its first batch of the GeForce RTX 50 series GPUs, but it's not yet likely done with the RTX 50 family as a whole. The GPU manufacturer is reportedly bringing the Super series, and if you are familiar, we previously did hear about a GeForce RTX 5080 Super in the making. Now typically Nvidia doesn't just release a single GPU in the entire series, and therefore it should be no surprise to see that Nvidia is preparing more GPUs in the Super lineup, as was reported by the prominent leaker Kupite7Kimi. Apparently Nvidia is bringing upgrades for both RTX 5070 Ti and the RTX 5070, and here is what the leaker shared on Twitter. If we take the RTX 5070 Super, you can see that it is technically identical to the non-Super edition, except that it has 18GB of VRAM compared to 12 on the RTX 5070. Similarly, we have the RTX 5070 Ti Super with 8GB of more VRAM capacity than the non-Super edition. However, all of this is done without changing the memory bus width, and here what Nvidia has done is deploy Samsung's 3GB GDDR7 modules. On the non-Super RTX 50 GPUs, you will see 2GB RAM modules, and with the introduction of 50% more VRAM on these chips, the Super cards can finally reach new memory configurations. Still, keep in mind that the number of modules remain the same on the PCB, and you will have the same memory bandwidth on both the cards. However, Nvidia has increased the power limits of both RTX 5070 Ti Super and the 5070 Super to 350 and 275 watts respectively. It's likely that adding more VRAM shouldn't consume more power, but I believe that Nvidia is doing so that the Super cards can be overclocked higher and will probably have higher clocks. Now, considering that higher VRAM does help in intensive titles on higher resolutions such as 1440p and 4K, I don't really think that the RTX 5070 Ti really needs a memory upgrade, although the higher memory on the RTX 5070 Super may help. With 18GB of VRAM, gaming at 4K with DLSS and frame gen on, the RTX 5070 can allow users to play intensive titles without any bottlenecks from the memory. At the moment, the 12GB VRAM is doing quite good at 1440p, but remember that with games becoming more memory hungry, the RTX 5070 Super can stand the test of time, just as we saw the RTX 3070 becoming obsolete in a year. On the other hand, the new 3GB chips need to be deployed on the 60 cards as well, since the RTX 5060 and 5060 Ti bring just 8GB of memory. The 5060 Ti does have a 16GB edition as well, but the 8GB edition is completely garbage, which is why it doesn't sell much. With 3GB modules, the 8GB version can have 12GB of memory, which will be excellent, and then the price tag of $379 will suit the GPU more. I hope Nvidia doesn't increase the prices of Super cards, and following the pricing trends of the past generations, the Super cards are generally released in the same price range as the non-Super cards. As for the RTX 5060, the 3GB modules are definitely needed to bump its memory capacity to 12GB. As for the past few generations, Nvidia 60 class cards have been stagnant in memory capacity. If Nvidia does this, then it will be a difficult challenge for AMD, since the RTX 5060 Super can easily have a big advantage over the AMD's RX 9060 XT 8GB model, and this might push AMD into releasing a refreshed RDNA 4 series with more VRAM. But since the GDDR6 memory doesn't have 3GB modules on the market, it's going to be a hard job for AMD. As for Nvidia, the 3GB GDDR7 modules were already deployed on the RTX 5090 laptop variant, which is why the GPU has 24GB of memory despite featuring a 256-bit memory bus. Since the 3GB GDDR7 module started to appear in the market a few weeks ago, Nvidia looks ready to release the Super cards in a few months. That said, it could also release an RTX 5090 with 48GB of VRAM, which basically will be too much for gaming. But since many use the GPU for AI workloads and stuff like that, this could increase the value of the 48GB edition incredibly. For gaming, the 32GB model is still more than sufficient even at 4K, and therefore the 3GB modules will largely affect the mid-range GPU segment, allowing gamers to have a relatively more future-proof GPU than the existing ones. That said, it is definitely interesting to see higher VRAM capacities on GPUs, but I think it's more appropriate if we can find solutions to decrease the VRAM usage in games. Both AMD and Nvidia have been reported to work on this, and as far as AMD is concerned, it showed off its work graphs, which basically reduces the VRAM consumption by over 600,000 times. What it does is that it uses word graphs, which is kind of procedural generation to render 3D assets like trees and foliage without depending on the GPU VRAM. Traditionally, the asset data needs to be stored into GPU VRAM, but the word graphs does this on the fly, and as demonstrated by AMD developers, the RX 7900 XTX uses just 51 kilobytes of data to render all those trees, bushes and vegetation, which could have required over 34 gigabytes of VRAM. Now this isn't going to solve all the VRAM issues, but with such techniques, a lot of similar assets can be generated in real time quickly without having to depend on the VRAM alone. Similarly, we have Nvidia's newest transformer model, which supposedly decreases the VRAM requirement by 20%. Nvidia has been using the CNN technique for its previous DLSS versions, but it introduced the transformer model with DLSS 4, and compared to the CNN, the transformer model does consume more VRAM but has a greater advantage in generating higher visual quality images. It is said that with the upcoming DLSS version, Nvidia will exit the beta phase for the transformer model and users will be able to see a drastic change in GPU memory consumption. So essentially, whether GPU manufacturers increase the VRAM or bring newer optimizations, it's very much needed. While it may be disappointing to see Nvidia and AMD sticking to 8GB GPUs, they are finally learning that these won't sell much unless you either increase the VRAM capacity or bring newer optimizations that can decrease the VRAM usage. So that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, then like the video and subscribe if you're new here, and I will see you in the next one.